I was a blind woman who bumped into the head of the Mafia. That same night, he began watching me as if I'd touched a part of him no one was ever supposed to reach. I just wanted to go home, take care of my grandmother, and survive playing piano for spare change. I didn't ask for protection. I didn't ask for coffee. I didn't ask for that dangerous man to learn my steps, my silences, and my weaknesses. But Lorenzo De Luca didn't seem to know how to look without possessing. And by the time I found out who he was, there was already something between us that not even the truth could erase. The problem is that men like him don't love without charging in blood. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Chest That Didn't Tremble. The rain started before I even left the apartment, and Nona coughed 3 times in a row when I ran my hand over her forehead to check for fever. Her skin was hot in the wrong way, that dry heat that doesn't call for a blanket but for a doctor. The room smelled of eucalyptus, old medicine, and a leftover bit of tomato sauce that had been sitting on the stove since lunch. The walls of Little Italy were still damp as always, with that faint mold around the baseboard that I recognized by touch, and the radiator creaked the way I already knew by heart, like a tired old man complaining every winter. "Go play," she murmured in Italian, holding my hand 2 seconds longer than usual. "Come home early." "I will, Nonna." She squeezed my fingers once more, the way she did when she was praying without wanting to admit she was praying. I grabbed the cane from behind the door, counted the steps to the stairs, and went down the 19 steps I knew by memory. The 5th one creaked, the 12th was shallower, the last had a loose piece of tile on the edge. Down below, the air smelled of bread from the corner bakery and of gasoline. I crossed Taylor Street with the cane tapping against the wet asphalt, turned onto the avenue, and caught the subway right on time. I played for 3 hours in that reserved corner of the Jackson platform, where the station engineers pretended not to see me and left me in peace. The trains rushed past, pushing that hot, metallic wind onto the back of my neck. Passengers tossed coins into the case of the electric piano, some with a clean clink, others with that muffled sound of someone who dropped them on purpose without looking. And I tried not to think about the electric bill or the prescription I still needed to buy the next morning. My fingers ached at the knuckle of my thumb, from the cold. I played Chopin so I wouldn't cry, and Gershwin when Chopin started to hurt too much. "Your head's on Mars today," Sienna said, leaning against the railing. She'd shown up halfway through the 2nd hour, smelling of brewed coffee from the bar where she worked upstairs, and of that cheap vanilla perfume she swore was French. "You hit 3 wrong notes, Aurora." "You don't hit 3 wrong notes even if I shove you." Nona got worse. "Want me to go over there later? I want you to leave me alone so I can finish." She laughed, in that way that didn't need an answer, and walked off, clicking her heels against the concrete in a rhythm that looked more like choreography than walking. I played for another 40 minutes and counted the coins by touch, sorting the quarters by the ridges on their edges. 2 bills, 11 big coins. Maybe enough for the prescription, maybe not. I tucked it all into the inner pocket of my coat, closed the piano case, and headed for the exit, pulling my hat down over my ears. That was when the cane struck a broken step I could have sworn I knew, and could have sworn I'd avoided, and my whole body was thrown forward. I knew, even before I fell, that I was going to hit someone. What I didn't know was that I'd hit a chest like that, a chest wide, solid, covered in wet wool, smelling of expensive cologne and of rain. It wasn't just any smell. It was woody, dark, with a citrus note underneath. I felt the impact travel up through my shoulders and stopped, with my face pressed against his cold fabric. For 2 seconds, no one breathed. It was the kind of silence I recognized even without seeing. Heavy boots around us didn't move away. On the contrary, they stepped 1 pace closer, in sync, as if that man were the center of something I didn't understand. I felt their tension before I felt the tension of the man whose chest it was. It was a tension of muscles at the ready, of hands that had moved somewhere and stopped halfway, by an order no one had to say out loud. But the man I'd crashed into didn't pull back. He didn't push me away. He didn't grab me. He just stood there, still, as if my weight against him were the strangest thing that had happened to him in a long time. His breath was held. I felt his chest rise, stop halfway, fall slowly, then rise again in a rhythm that seemed freshly learned. Beneath the coat, his heart beat steady, not fast, not calm, just steady, as if nothing in the world could demand an explanation from him. My God, I laughed, embarrassment creeping up my neck. Mi scusi tanto. The cane had fallen. I tried to step back with some dignity and nearly tripped again over my own heel. I crouched down, hand stretched out across the wet asphalt, searching for the handle. The rain fell harder now, running down my bangs, and I knew I was soaked, but it was impossible to look any more foolish than I already did. I felt his movement before the sound. He crouched down, slowly, unhurried, saying nothing, with that kind of movement that seemed to fit inside any expensive clothing without creasing it. His hand found the cane first, and when he placed it in mine, the touch was that of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Long fingers, a warm palm, no hesitation, with the roughness of some callus that my hand registered without meaning to. He waited for me to close my hand before letting go. "Don't run with that in your hand." The voice came low, restrained, with that kind of calm that doesn't ask permission to exist. I lifted my chin in his direction by instinct. I couldn't see anything beyond a large shadow against the yellow light of the station, a tall blur taking up more space than it should, but the voice hung in the air as if it had a weight of its own, as if each word were set on the ground between us with a jeweler's care. "I wasn't running," I shot back, adjusting my coat. "I was leaving. There's a difference." "There is." He didn't laugh, but something in his voice shifted, a short, minimal vibration, as if he'd found it amusing and decided not to show it. The men around us stayed still. I counted at least 4 pairs of feet. One of them shifted his weight from his right leg to his left, and the creak of the boot leather was the loudest thing that happened in those seconds. "Thank you for the cane," I said, taking 2 steps to the side. "And sorry about the coat. I hope it wasn't good wool." It was. Ouch. This time I was almost certain he smiled, but I had no way to confirm it. I only felt his presence, still, watching my every movement in a way that wasn't a threat, but wasn't casual either. It was pure attention, as if I were a glass falling and he was calculating whether there'd be time to catch it. And the worst, or the best, was that he didn't seem in any hurry to let me go. "Do you live far?" he asked. 3 blocks. "I'll take you." It was so direct that I laughed before I could even process it. It wasn't a request. It was a statement, the same way someone says, "It's raining." The laugh came easily, still embarrassed from the fall, and I shook my head as I fit the cane into my right hand. "Thank you, but I'm more afraid of cars than of the rain, and I know these 3 blocks better than I know my own face." "You know your face." I did, a long time ago. I said it without thinking, and realized too late how heavy it sounded. I expected awkward silence, or some polite phrase to end the conversation, but the man fell silent again. Not the silence that apologizes, the silence that listens. It was a silence that had temperature, and I swear I saw his shadow lean an inch in my direction. "Good night," I said, before things could get worse. "Good night, signorina." The word reached me from behind when I'd already taken the first step. It came out of his mouth with a clean accent, no affectation, like someone who'd grown up hearing it. I gripped the cane handle and walked off, tapping the sidewalk more firmly than I needed to, pretending I didn't hear a heavy car's engine start behind me. It was a deep engine, the kind that cost more than everything inside my apartment. I walked the 3 blocks in a strange state. The rain didn't stop, but I'd forgotten to feel it. I couldn't stop smiling, and had no idea why. It had been a man, an ordinary man, in the rain, at the exit of a subway. It was ridiculous. I hadn't even seen his face. I didn't know the color of his coat. I didn't know if he had a beard, if he was young, if he was old. I only had the smell, the voice, and the way he'd handed back my cane as if he were handing back a piece of me. I climbed the 19 steps counting, opened the apartment door, and the smell of eucalyptus greeted me along with Nona's hoarse voice. "You took a while." "It was the rain, Nona." I took off the soaked coat, hung it over the kitchen chair, and went to her room. She had her head tilted to one side, eyes closed, the way she slept when she had a fever. Her breathing was lighter than it had been that morning, and I thanked God for it in silence. "Aurora." "Yes, why are you smiling?" I stopped in the doorway. Her eyes were still closed. I hadn't even said anything. I hadn't even laughed. "I'm not smiling." "You are. I can hear it." I leaned against the door frame, defeated, the old wood pressing into my shoulder. I bumped into a man at the subway exit, and he smelled good. Nona let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough, and turned her face the other way. She said nothing more, but I knew she'd smiled too, that small smile she saved just for me. I switched off the hallway light, and went to my room, hair still wet, and the cane propped against the wall. Down below, on the corner, an engine kept running for a long time. I had no way to see, but the sound of a big car, the kind that idles parked without caring about the gas, stayed there all night, like a dog that had picked a door. I lay down, turned my face toward the window side, and the sound reached me muffled through the glass, constant, patient, and I, understanding nothing, fell asleep with my hand closed over the sheet, as if I were holding a cane that no one would ever hand back to me. Later, he would tell me that, inside the car, he said only one thing that night: write down her address, and that the engine stayed running until dawn. Chapter 2. The Man with the Coffee. On Wednesday, I went back to the platform as if nothing had happened, because nothing had happened. That's what I kept repeating to myself as I set up the electric piano in the reserved corner, fitting the tripod legs into their usual spot, adjusting the open case half a meter away to catch the coins. The concrete of the platform was cold even through my shoe, and the air had that smell of wet metal that clung to the stations after a night of rain. I ran my fingers over the keys before playing, feeling each one as if it were the first time. The line of middle C was a little worn on the right corner, a detail of mine, only mine, that no one else would notice. The first song was to warm up my fingers. The second I chose on a whim, an old nocturne my mother liked to play before everything fell apart. It was in the middle of the third measure that the smell arrived. Coffee, strong, freshly brewed, with that bitter touch that rises first, and that I always associated with mornings. It came cutting through the frozen air of the platform like a promise, and for a second, my fingers almost missed the next note. I felt someone approach the bench beside me, slowly. The breath came before the sound, held, controlled, with that cadence of someone who learns early not to make noise. I didn't need to lift my face. I already knew. It was the same chest I'd tripped into 2 days before, the same expensive coat that had smelled of rain and of something woody I still couldn't name. He said nothing. He just sat down and set something on the floor, near my right foot, in the exact spot where I'd reach out if I wanted to drink. The warmth of the cup rose up through the leather of my shoe. I kept playing, pretending my heart hadn't just changed rhythm in the middle of the score. I played 3 more whole songs without stopping. He didn't get up, didn't comment, didn't clear his throat. He was just there, beside me, breathing slowly while the station rattled with the arrival and departure of the trains. With each car that stopped, a gust of wind pushed the coffee smell closer to my face, and with each car that left, it carried away a little of my ability to fake indifference. When I finished, I lowered my hands from the keyboard and stayed a few seconds with my head tilted, listening to his silence. "Thank you for the coffee," I said out loud, not knowing if he was still there. "I'm here," the voice came from the bench. I smiled without meaning to. I reached out to the cup, found the thick paper sleeve, and lifted it. The heat passed through my glove and rose up my wrist as if it were in a hurry. "Good stuff. I hope so. Are you following me? No. You're just sitting beside me by chance, at an exact time, with an exact coffee in your hand." "Yes." I took a sip. The coffee was bitter at just the right point, with a touch of hazelnut. I couldn't remember the last time someone had gotten my coffee right without asking. People usually got it wrong. Too much sugar, too much milk, or one of those artificial flavors that hurt behind your eyes. He hadn't gotten anything wrong. "You're a man of few words." I learned that over time. "Learn to talk more," I shot back. "The music, thanks you." He let out a short sound through his nose, which was the closest to a laugh I'd managed to draw out of him. The bench creaked slightly when he adjusted himself. I felt his coat brush my elbow by a millimeter and move away again, as if he'd noticed too late. That millimeter stayed on my skin after he moved away, and I hated how quickly my body registered the absence. "The music," he said. "Whose was it? No one famous?" "It was my mother's." It was. I hesitated. "And you? What's your name?" "Lorenzo." Just that. No last name. Nothing more. I repeated it softly with my mouth closed, just to feel the shape of it. He didn't ask anything else. I found that elegant in a way I couldn't describe. Most people, on hearing that tried to fix it with some canned phrase, with an embarrassed condolence, with a change of subject so abrupt it hurt. He just stayed quiet and let the silence be mine. He didn't try to fix it. I thanked him inside and went back to the keyboard before my throat tightened. I played one more song. When I lifted my blind eyes toward the bench, there was no more breathing. He'd left without a sound, and the cup was still there on the floor, almost full, cooling slowly against my shoe. I sat for a while just listening to the emptiness he'd left. It was an emptiness with a shape, an emptiness with weight. On Friday, he came back. I knew he'd arrived even before the smell of coffee appeared, because the way his footsteps sounded had something I already recognized. The heel meeting the concrete with weight, but without violence. Like a man who measures the ground before he steps. It was the kind of walk that could fit through a dark hallway without waking anyone. He sat on the same bench. He set the cup in the same spot, the same centimeters between the leather of my shoe and the warmth of the paper. "Again?" I asked, without stopping playing. "Again. Do you like this song?" "I like any song you play." I missed a note. It was the first time all week. I covered it by chaining something else over it and kept going. But I felt my face heat up in a way I hated. My fingers carried on because my fingers knew what to do. The rest of me had stopped entirely. "Don't say things like that in the middle of a measure," I complained. He noted. There was a pause in which he just listened to me, and the pause weighed more than any phrase he could have said. He didn't fill the silence. He lived inside it. On Saturday, he came back. When I left the platform, it was nearly midnight, and Sienna was waiting at the top of the escalator with her arms crossed, and the smell of fries from the cafe where she worked. The air up there was colder than down in the station, and the fine rain of that hour had already begun to wet the sidewalk. "3 coffees in 1 week, she said, walking beside me down the street. "Aurora, 3. I know how to count. Either he's in love, or he's crazy. And in Chicago, the odds are about 50-50. Stop making things up." "I'm not making things up. I saw the guy from the bar window. Expensive coat, expensive shoes. Head down the whole time. Aurora, that kind of man doesn't drink coffee in a subway station. That kind of man sends someone to buy it. You didn't see anything." "I saw everything. And the 2 guys standing at the end of the hallway while he listened to you play, too." I stopped walking. The cane hit the concrete and went still in my fist. "What 2 guys?" "Forget it. I talk too much." She nudged me by the elbow. "Go home. Sienna, go home. Aurora." I walked the rest of the way with my head fuller than it should have been. The 2 guys. The phrase kept rising and falling inside my chest, and I tried to convince myself that Sienna was exaggerating, that she made up stories even about silly things. But the sound of his heel on the concrete came back to my ear, and his silence, and the way he'd measured every centimeter of space between us, as if every centimeter mattered. I climbed the building stairs one by one, counting out of old habit, and when I reached the landing, I stopped. There was someone on the corner down below. It wasn't fear. It was attention. It was the kind of presence I'd learned to feel when someone stayed too long in the same spot. I leaned against the apartment door, hand on the icy knob, and stood still, listening to the street. A low engine, running, in no hurry. An engine that wasn't waiting for someone to come out. It was waiting to be sure I'd gone in. "You again?" I asked the air. No one answered, but the engine didn't start up to leave. And someone who's running starts the engine. I smiled at the stairs, opened the door, and went in. I closed it slowly, carefully, and rested my forehead against the wood for a second before turning the key. Nonna was awake, with the little radio playing softly in the kitchen. The air smelled of chamomile tea and old bread warmed over the flame, the smell of that house for as long as I'd known myself. She turned her face toward the door before I said a word. "Sit," she said, in Italian. I sat. The chair creaked as always. "This man," she went on, in the same language, stirring the spoon slowly inside her cup. "The coffee one you mentioned the other night. What about him, Nonna? You talk about him in a certain way, Aurora. A way that isn't yours." She took her time. I heard the spoon tapping against the ceramic in a gentle rhythm. I heard the radiator clicking near the window. And there's the engine down below that turns on and doesn't go away. I can hear that from here. "You hear too much, Nonna. I hear what you don't want to hear. That man isn't what he seems." I swallowed hard. The gulp went down rough, as if it were cold coffee. "Did you hear him?" "I hear everything, cara mia." The spoon stopped. "I hear how he walks on the corner. He walks like a man who learned not to make noise. That kind of man learns for a reason." "What reason?" She turned her face toward me. I couldn't see her eyes, but I felt the weight of her gaze as if I felt a hand on my cheek. The whole kitchen seemed to shrink around our table. "Aurora?" "Yes." "You like him?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The heat that rose up my neck answered for me, and Nonna always knew how to hear what I didn't say. She sighed. She took my hand across the table, with those thin, warm fingers I'd known forever, and squeezed gently. Her fingers trembled a little. I didn't know if it was from age or from what she was about to say. "Go slow, Piccola. With a man who makes no noise, we always go slow. I stood, kissed her forehead, and went to my room without saying anything more. I lay on the bed fully dressed, the cane propped against the wall and my heart beating in the wrong rhythm. The sheet smelled of the cheap soap we bought on the corner, and I lay there staring at a ceiling I couldn't see, as if it had answers. Outside, on the corner, the engine stayed silent, and I, for the first time in a long while, couldn't decide whether that silence was good or whether it was the most dangerous thing that had ever entered my life. Chapter 3. The Clean Hands. 2 weeks after that first Wednesday, Monday arrived with a dry cold that cut Taylor Street in half. In 14 days, the coffee man had become routine. Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, then Tuesday, then Friday again. Always on the same bench, always on the right side, always without asking anything I didn't want to answer. I was standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, my thin coat buttoned up to my neck, waiting for the man who had started calling me the little piano girl, in a voice too low to be harmless. He'd told me, the night before, that he'd managed to convince someone to open a closed restaurant just for the two of us. I'd laughed the way I always laughed at him, half sarcastic, half breathless, and asked if he was trying to impress me. "No," he'd answered. "I'm trying to feed you." It was there, in that second, that I realized I was in serious danger. Not the kind Nona would want me to fear, the other kind. The car pulled up. I recognized the engine by the vibration in the sole of my shoe before I even heard the door open. He got out, and his footsteps had that restrained weight of someone who'd learned early not to make noise. I felt his hand touch my elbow with the lightness one reserves for what can break. "Aurora," he said, "let's walk. It's 3 blocks. You trust my legs that much. I trust them more than the asphalt in this city." I laughed quietly, let him fit my arm into the crook of his elbow, and we walked. Taylor Street smelled of bread, fresh out of the oven from a bakery 2 doors down, and further ahead, of gardenia perfume from the lady who sold flowers on the corner. I recognized every meter by smell, but this time, there was something more. His wool coat, the warmth escaping his body, the way he shortened his stride to match mine without saying he was shortening it. "We're almost there," he warned. "There are 2 steps at the entrance. Low, I'll count them. You don't need to count. I know I don't need to. I'm counting because I want to." And he counted. 1, 2. The restaurant door opened before he touched the handle. I walked into a smell of tomato sauce simmered for hours, garlic golden in olive oil, fresh basil. The dining room was silent, no other table occupied. I knew, without having to ask, that he had paid for it to be that way. "I'm going to step on something," I said, laughing. "I guarantee it. I'm between you and anything." He pulled out the chair. I felt the backrest at just the right height, the dark wood tabletop under my fingers, a lit candle some 30 centimeters from my wrist. I rested the folded cane against the leg of the chair. He sat across from me. "Aurora," he said, "do you want me to describe the place?" That caught me off guard. "What do you mean, describe?" "The walls, the tables, the painting hanging behind you, the chandelier, whatever you want." I took a while to answer. No one had ever offered me that before. In all those years, no one had ever understood that describing the world, for me, was opening a window the degenerative disease had closed on some morning of my adolescence, back when I still thought that morning would be like any other. "The wall," I asked. "What color is the wall behind you?" There was a pause. 3 seconds, I'd say. He was looking. I knew. And he couldn't name what he saw. "Red," he said, finally. "Dark red. You don't know color, do you?" "No. A whole life looking at walls and you never paid attention to a single one." I didn't say I don't pay attention. I said I don't know the name. I smiled without meaning to. I tilted my face toward his voice. "Then we'll have to fix that. I'll teach you the names of colors, and you lend me your eyes. Deal." He stayed silent for 1 second longer than he should have. When he answered, his voice was lower. "The deal." We ate slowly. He described the pasta before the pasta arrived. Thin strands coiled like little golden spirals, with sauce dripping over the edge of the plate. He described the wine, dark, dense, smelling of old wood. He described the waiter, a short man, bald, a black jacket with 1 more button than it needed, and somewhere between the second course and the espresso, I realized he was enjoying himself, not the food, the exercise of watching me look at what he described. When we left, the street had gone cold for good. He walked me back with the same patience, the same firm elbow. At the entrance of the building, he stopped. Aurora, I'm not going to come up. I know you're not. He moved a millimeter closer. Just one. I felt his forehead touch my temple. It was 2 seconds, maybe 3. He didn't kiss me. He didn't try. He just stayed there, resting, as if he needed me to hold up his own weight for a brief moment. Then he pulled away. "Good night," he said. "Good night, Mr. of the Red Walls." I heard his low laugh go down the sidewalk. I climbed the stairs with my heart beating in a rhythm I didn't recognize. When I opened the apartment door, Nona was awake, praying softly. I took off my coat slowly, afraid she'd hear the way I was breathing. "Smells like garlic," she said, without opening her eyes. "I ate Italian. With him. She said nothing more that night. Neither did I. 2 days later, Nonna had a fever. I woke before dawn to the sound of her coughing in the small back room. I went there barefoot, sat on the edge of her bed, pressed my hand to her forehead. It was too hot. I brought water, brought a wet cloth, brought the medicine left over from the previous month because I still hadn't managed to buy the current month's. I didn't go play that morning. I didn't go in the afternoon. When the sun went down, she was still the same. I called him. I didn't ask for anything. I just said, in a voice firmer than I was feeling, that I might not make it to the platform for a few days, because Nona wasn't well. He listened in silence. Then he said, "I'll come over. You don't have to. Aurora, you don't have to. Aurora, I'll come over." I hung up the phone with the feeling that I'd been knocked down without anyone pushing me. 40 minutes later, I heard his footsteps on the building's narrow staircase. I recognized them at once. That way of stepping, putting his weight on the foot that lands first, as if each step were a room where he needed to assess the exit before continuing. I opened the door before he knocked. "You're fast. I'm punctual. It's not the same thing." "No," he said, coming in. "It's not." Nonna was in the living room now, leaning back in the old armchair that was the only piece in the apartment she'd let me wash once a month. I felt the air change density when he came in. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. She lifted her face toward him before he opened his mouth, as if she already knew exactly who had stepped into that room. "Buonasera, signora," he said, in Italian. A very low voice. Nonna took a deep breath. She took her time. "L'uomo che porta santi e diavoli nella stessa tasca," she said, slowly. "The man who carries saints and devils in the same pocket." I didn't understand at that moment the size of that phrase. I'd understand later. But I saw, felt, really, the way his body lost its color. It was just 1 second. A pause in his breathing that I'd already learned to count the way you count heartbeats. He said nothing. He walked slowly to the armchair, knelt on the floor beside her like a son. He took Nonna's hand between both of his. I stood in the kitchen doorway, not knowing which side of the scene I should go to. "You have a fever," he said. "I'm old," she answered. "It's something else." He didn't laugh. "I'll send a doctor first thing tomorrow." "Caro, I didn't ask." "I know you didn't ask." Nonna closed her eyes. She squeezed his fingers with the little strength she had. "Take care of my girl." It was a whisper. I heard it from the kitchen threshold, because the silence in the apartment that night was dense enough to carry 3 words from one room to another. He took a deep breath. He didn't say, yes. He didn't need to. He stayed until Nonna fell asleep. He changed the cloth on her forehead twice. He adjusted the blanket over her legs. He spoke to me in the kitchen in almost no voice at all, asking if I'd had dinner, saying he'd send food the next morning, telling me the doctor would arrive at 7. Before he left, he stood for a while in the doorway and asked me, without quite looking at me, whether I had an old test result stored somewhere. "Anything," he said, for a friend of his who might be able to look at it. I answered that I did. He just nodded. When he left, he rested his hand on my cheek for a second. Just that. And he went down the narrow staircase without looking back. I closed the door. I rested my forehead against it. For a very brief moment, I thought that maybe what Nonna had said about saints and devils wasn't just her old Italian talking to itself. On Thursday night, I went back to playing. The Jackson Station platform was emptier than usual. I played 1 hour less because I was still worried about Nonna. I gathered the little coin box, closed the lid of the borrowed piano, took the cane. I climbed the escalator. It was in the alley behind the station that I heard it. 2 men. They weren't the usual footsteps. Not the beggar who slept by the warm grate. Not the newspaper delivery guy who always greeted me. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps, spaced in a way that only exists when someone is measuring the distance to someone else. I felt the air change temperature on the back of my neck. I felt the cane grow heavier in my hand. "Good night," I said, out loud. To no one. No one answered. I gripped the cane handle. I mentally calculated how many steps it would take to reach the lit corner. 12, maybe 13. I started walking. The footsteps behind me sped up a little. I gripped the handle tighter, and then, from where I couldn't tell, other footsteps. Lighter, faster, coming from the opposite side. 3 people, at least. There was a short noise. A collision, maybe. A body brushing against another with restrained force. A swallowed curse. And then, the silence came back. Not the silence that comes with fear. The clean silence. The silence of someone who had resolved something for me without asking my permission. I stood still for 2 seconds. "Thank you," I said, not knowing to whom. No one answered again, but someone took a deep breath, far off, at the end of the alley, and just by the way of that breath I knew it wasn't him. It was another, someone who worked for him. I walked to the lit corner. I took the phone from my bag. I called, "Aurora." There was someone behind me. Silence on the other end of the line. A silence that lasted too long to be harmless. "Are you okay?" "I am." There was someone behind me, and then there was someone behind that person. "Do you know anything about this?" He took his time. "Go home, Aurora. I'll call you when you get there." "Lorenzo, go home." I hung up. I walked the 3 blocks with my heart in my throat, but in no hurry, because hurry, at that moment, would have been admitting something I wasn't ready to admit yet. At home, Nonna slept peacefully. The fever had broken. I changed clothes. Lay down. The phone rang exactly when my head touched the pillow. "I'm home," I said. "Good. Lorenzo, tell me, who were those men?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters." He took a deep breath. I heard, on the other end of the line, the sound of paper being folded. "Aurora, there's something I need to tell you. Not today. On Sunday." "What is it?" "On Sunday." "You're scaring me." "No, I'm giving you good news. I swear it's good news. I just need Sunday." I closed my eyes in the dark. I pressed the phone against my ear as if it were a hand. "All right," I said. "Sunday." He hung up. I lay there in the dark, listening to Nonna's breathing in the other room. And only when I started to drift off did I realize that he had found, somewhere in the world, something he thought worthy of offering me. I couldn't imagine what. I only knew that his voice, on the phone, had a kind of hope I'd never heard in him before, and I didn't know whether that made me happy or more afraid than everything that had come before. Chapter 4: The Night the Lake Listened. Sunday morning, his car stopped in front of the building at 8 o'clock sharp. I came down in jeans and a white blouse, with the cane folded in my pocket because he'd said, the night before, that it was a routine appointment and that I wouldn't have to walk much on my own. I found that strange. I had never mentioned any appointment, but Lorenzo, over the last few weeks, had begun to know things about my life before I told him, and I, in a carelessness I now recognize as the beginning, had begun to find that less invasive and more tender. My mistake. "Good morning," he said, opening the car door for me. The smell of the seat's leather came mixed with that of the coffee he'd left in the cup holder for me, still hot, like on every morning when he crossed my path. "Good morning. What appointment is this?" "Northwestern. A friend of mine asked to look at an old test result of yours. I didn't take any test. You did. 2 months ago. Through the city's insurance. I requested a copy." I stopped with my hand on the doorframe. "Lorenzo? Get in the car, Aurora." I got in. Not because I agreed, because Nonna was at the window above the bakery watching me, and I didn't want to slam a door in front of her. Northwestern Hospital smelled of disinfectant and weak vending machine coffee. The doctor who received us wasn't American. He spoke with a German accent, calm hands, around 60 years old. He greeted me by name, sat in the chair beside me, asked if I knew why I was there. I answered no. He looked at Lorenzo. Lorenzo took a deep breath. "Aurora," the doctor said, in a gentle voice, "there's an experimental procedure that's been conducted in Zurich for 4 years. Patients with your specific condition, your age range, your type of degeneration. The statistics are good. Partial recovery in 8 out of 10 cases." I felt the blood rise to my jaw. "And you're telling me this because Mr. DeLuca brought me your medical records, and you're a candidate." I turned my face toward Lorenzo. I couldn't speak for 2 or 3 seconds. When I could, my voice came out low. "You did what?" "Aurora, you took my medical records. I requested a copy. Without asking me. I knew you wouldn't let me." I stood. I took the cane. I left the office without saying anything more. I heard the doctor say something in an apologetic tone. I heard Lorenzo thank him in the tone of someone who wasn't listening. I heard footsteps behind mine down the hallway. Aurora, don't talk to me. Aurora, listen, don't talk to me. I reached the lobby. The cane hit the revolving door twice before I managed to line up the angle. He came after me. When we reached the sidewalk, I stopped and turned toward his voice. The noise of the Michigan Avenue traffic faded into the background, as if the whole city had lowered the volume to hear what I was about to say. You want to buy this for me? I want to pay for it. It's the same thing. It's not. It's exactly the same thing, Lorenzo. You have money. I don't. You decide behind my back. I end up owing for the rest of my life something I never even asked for. You never asked for anything in your life. Not asking is different from accepting that someone buy it for me. Aurora, you're buying me. The word came out harder than I intended. I felt the blow land on his face. There was a second of silence, the size of that whole sidewalk. He didn't answer. He didn't try to defend himself. He just stood there, and his silence hurt me more than any answer would have. Take me home, I said. I'll take you. We went back without exchanging a word. When he stopped in front of the building, I got out without looking to the side. I climbed the stairs with Nona asking what had happened, and answered that nothing had happened, that I was just tired. I locked my bedroom door, sat on the bed, and cried without making a sound, because I never knew how to cry making noise. He showed up that night. He didn't knock on the building's door. He sent Dante to let me know he was on the park bench 2 blocks away, in Lincoln Park, near the water. He said he'd wait as long as it took. He said that if I didn't come, he'd understand. I went down in a thicker coat, because the night had turned cold, with wind coming off the lake, the kind that gets in through the seams. I walked slowly, counting corners, without the cane. I knew this path. The damp smell of trampled leaves announced the park before the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel. When I reached the bench, I heard his breathing before I touched the wooden backrest. You came, he said. I came. I sat. He didn't move closer. He kept about 20 centimeters between us. We stayed silent for maybe a whole minute. I heard the lake water lapping at the shore, far off. I heard the wind pass through the leaves behind the bench. I heard his breath going in and out in a rhythm I'd never heard before. Slower, more tired, more human. Aurora, he said, finally. I don't know how to apologize. I noticed. I know how to give orders. I know how to pay. I know how to solve things. I don't know how to ask. Try. He took a deep breath. I lived my whole life surrounded by blood, by guilt, by darkness. I'm not going to explain it to you now because this isn't the night for it, but it's true. Everything I've built up to today was built on top of dirty things. Aurora, everything. I don't have a single clean thing to offer you. I clasped my hands in my lap. When I read your medical records and found out this surgery existed, I thought of one single thing, that maybe, for the first time in 36 years, I could do something beautiful, without gaining anything from it, without needing anything in return, without anyone knowing my name. His voice trembled in a very small place, so small that maybe only I had learned to hear it. I'm not buying you, he said. I don't have enough money to buy you. You don't have a price, Aurora. I'm just trying once in my life to do something for the right reason. You can say no. You have every right to say no, but I'll need, for the rest of my life, to know that I at least tried. I swallowed hard. I felt the tears start before I could stop them, and I didn't try. You don't talk like this to anyone, do you? I asked. No. Why to me? Because you owe me nothing, and even so you listened to me. I stayed silent. I looked toward the lake I couldn't see, and tried to imagine the sky above it. I tried to imagine what it would be like, after so many years, to open my eyes one morning and find the color of the walls of Nonna's room. I tried to imagine what it would be like, perhaps, to open my eyes and find for the first time the face of this man I already knew by smell, by voice, by silence. All right, I said. He turned his face toward me. I felt it. All right, Lorenzo. I accept. But on one condition. Tell me, you never decide anything for me again without asking. Never again. Not even to save me. Deal. Truly a deal. Aurora, he said, and his voice had a kind of weariness that was almost gratitude. Truly a deal. He moved closer. He didn't kiss me. He just leaned in and pressed his lips to my forehead for a second. Lightly, like someone sealing a document. I felt the warmth of his skin through the cold of the night, and the faint smell of the woody perfume I'd already learned to recognize from 3 steps away. Then he pulled back. We stayed on the bench a few more minutes without saying anything. When I got up, He took me back without asking, and this time I let him. The following Wednesday, the world turned upside down in 45 seconds. I left the Jackson Station platform in the late afternoon. I'd played for 3 hours, gathered the little box, thanked Sienna for the coffee on my break. I climbed the escalator with the same feeling as always. Step, step, cold handrail, street air coming in through the mouth of the underground. I reached the sidewalk. I felt the low sun on my face. And then, 2 bodies, one on the right, another on the left. I didn't hear them arrive. They came too fast, calculated, rehearsed. I felt a large hand on my elbow, another at my waist, and a third, coming from, I don't know where, over my mouth. The smell of cold tobacco on the palm of that hand reached me before my own shock. I couldn't scream. I tried. The cane fell from my hand. "Walk," said a male voice, too close to my ear. "Walk quietly." They pushed me 3 meters forward. I heard a car door open. I felt the leather upholstery against the back of my leg. I fell sitting inside. The door slammed. The engine was already running. "Grab the seatbelt." Another voice, further back. "If she gets hurt, the boss rips your head off." "What boss?" "Our boss." Idiot. The car took off. I sat still, both hands in my lap. My breath caught in my chest. For one absurd second, I thought of Nonna. I thought of Lorenzo. I thought that maybe I'd accepted the lake of the night before too soon. Then I breathed, and I remembered something I learned early. When you can't see, the world offers you other ways of knowing where you are. I started to count. Curves, traffic lights, horns, smells coming in through the poorly closed window on the driver's side. The smell of a bakery at some point after the station. A gas station right after a right turn. A more open stretch of road. Strong wind. A different vibration in the tires. We'd left downtown. 15 more minutes. Smell of industrial oil. Smell of burnt rubber. Smell of stagnant water. It wasn't Lake Michigan. It was a canal. Industrial zone. Far from downtown. The car stopped. The doors opened. "Get out," said the voice. Slowly. I got out slowly. They led me across a cement floor, then across a corrugated metal floor that echoed under my steps. A warehouse. High ceiling. A long echo. Smell of oil. Damp cardboard. Recent cigarettes. They sat me in a cold metal chair that bit the thin fabric of my pants. They didn't tie my hands. They didn't need to. I couldn't see well enough to escape. And they knew it. There were footsteps. 1 pair. Heavy footwear. A calm walk. A deliberate stop about 2 meters in front of me. "Aurora Bellucci," said a new voice. Calm, younger than Lorenzo's. "We heard you talking to your grandmother on the phone the other day. I apologize in advance. Who are you?" "Aldo. Just Aldo. You know I can't see." "I know. Then why are you here?" He laughed quietly. I didn't like the laugh. "I'm here because I wanted to understand. What kind of woman makes Lorenzo DeLuca drink coffee in a subway station 3 times a week? Do you have any idea how long it's been since anyone saw that man sitting on a public bench?" I swallowed hard. I didn't answer. "So you didn't know," he said, more to himself than to me. "Curious, very curious. I don't know what you're talking about. You will know, not from me, from him, when he comes." I clasped my hands in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't give him that piece of skin. "He'll come," Aldo went on. "I know he will. I just need you to stay there, nice and quiet, and for him to come. And he's going to show me something he hasn't shown anyone in 20 years, that he has something to lose." That was when I understood. Not everything, but enough. The coffee man wasn't a tired broker. He wasn't a friend of the family. He wasn't a gentleman in an expensive jacket who described red walls because he'd spent his life looking at them without paying attention. He was something else. He was exactly the thing Nonna had tried to tell me in a single phrase of old Italian, with his hand between hers, in the living room armchair. The man who carries saints and devils in the same pocket. I had heard the phrase as poetry. It had been a warning. Aldo must have seen something in my face. He laughed again. "Ah," he said. "There it is. Now you know." Chapter 5. The Silent War. The first thing I understood was the smell. It wasn't the warehouse. The warehouse smelled of old oil, of damp cement, of the rough rope that had spent the whole afternoon marking the skin of my wrists. It was a new smell coming in through the crack of the steel door, a smell of burnt gunpowder and cold rain, and inside it, beneath everything, the scent of wet wool that I'd recognize in any corner of the world, even if I lived 100 years without hearing that voice again. Lorenzo had arrived. I was tied to a wooden chair in the center of the warehouse, in Cicero, with my hands bound to the backrest and my bare feet on a floor that seemed to want to bite me with cold. The wood of the chair had a loose splinter on the corner, and I'd spent the last few hours focused on it, on the way it scratched the thin fabric of my dress, because thinking about the splinter was better than thinking about the rest. Aldo Moretti had left the warehouse a little earlier, not out of flight, but with the calm of someone who wanted another man to witness the scene in his place. Before leaving, he'd tried to figure out, with me, what he couldn't figure out on his own. Why a man like Lorenzo De Luca would lose his head over a blind woman who played piano on a subway platform. Later, I'd understand that he wanted to be only the warning, not the target, deliver the message and disappear for the next move. He'd spoken low, too close, with the sour breath of someone who hadn't slept in days. I didn't answer, not because I was brave, because I didn't know either. I heard the door burst open. It wasn't a gunshot. It was deeper than a gunshot. It was the sound of a metal plate giving way. And behind it, footsteps. Many footsteps. A firm, even tread, in no hurry. I counted 6 pairs of feet, then lost count. Someone shouted in Italian to my left. Someone else answered in English. Closer. And the voice cut off in the middle of the word. And then the silence came in waves. Small silences, each marked by a short, dry crack, and right after, by the muffled thud of a weight collapsing onto the corrugated metal, which echoed until it died near the ceiling. Each pair of those sounds was a man who stopped breathing. I counted 7. I stopped counting. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. Aurora, his voice came cracked, low, from the other side of the warehouse. It was the first time I'd ever heard Lorenzo say my name like that, like someone holding a glass about to shatter, like someone not sure the glass still exists. His footsteps crossed the cement quickly, too quickly, and when he got close, I felt the coat before I felt him. Wet wool, and beneath the wool, that smell of metal I already knew without ever having learned to name it. "I'm here," I said. My own voice sounded foreign to me, as if it came from a borrowed throat. His hands found mine behind the chair. They were firm hands, but they trembled. I had never felt his hands tremble. He cut the rope in 2 quick movements with something I preferred not to think about, and when he freed me, he held my wrists with a delicacy that didn't match what had happened in the last minutes on the other side of the door. His fingers passed over the red marks of the rope, as if the marks were his, as if he had put them there. "Well, can you stand?" "I can." I stood. My legs gave out. He caught me before the floor reached me. That was how I felt it, on his shoulder, against my cheek. His coat was wet with a water that wasn't rain. It was heavier, warmer. I closed the eyes that couldn't see anyway. I said nothing. He took off the coat and wrapped it around me before carrying me outside, and I let him, not because I'd accepted it, because I still didn't have the strength to refuse. The coat was heavy, far too big for me, and smelled of him in a way that hurt more than my injured wrist. Outside, the rain came back. It fell in thick, spaced drops, the kind that announces a storm. The man who always walked behind Lorenzo opened the door of the armored car without a word. I knew him by his short breathing, by his always slightly measured step, always behind him, always alert. Lorenzo would call him Dante later, and the name would stick. Lorenzo set me in the back seat like someone setting down something fragile, sat beside me, closed the door. The car took off. I smelled the new leather, the smell of the coat around me, and his smell, too close. For a long moment no one spoke, only the rain on the roof, beating in an uneven rhythm, and the muffled engine, and my own breathing, which I could no longer control properly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, finally. "No. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He took a deep breath, once. It was the only thing resembling crying that I heard come out of Lorenzo De Luca in my entire life. I felt his hand settle near mine on the seat, without touching, and stay there, suspended, for a second that felt longer than the whole night. Then he drew his hand back. He didn't ask permission to touch mine. I didn't offer it either. We crossed Chicago before dawn. I knew the way by the sounds, the curve of the overpass, the stretch of cobblestone where the tire changes its sound, the automatic gate that opened to swallow us with that lazy creak of heavy iron, the De Luca mansion on Astor Street. I had never been inside. I didn't need to ask where I was. "Guest room," Lorenzo said, more to Dante than to me. "Doctor in 15 minutes. And send someone to stay with her grandmother tonight. First thing tomorrow I want a nurse installed there. Permanent, Full shift. Already arranged, Dante answered, succinct as always. We climbed a wide staircase. The parquet under my bare feet was cold and smooth, recently waxed, and the wooden handrail seemed to have been polished by generations of hands. Dante offered me his arm, and I insisted on walking. I made it to the third step and gave in. He carried me the remaining 17 without comment. Lorenzo followed behind. I heard his breathing on my right side, too controlled to be calm, with that pause between inhalations that only exists in someone counting the seconds so as not to lose his mind. They put me in a bed that smelled of lavender and of a sheet pressed with a hot iron. The doctor arrived, examined me, said little. He had small, dry hands. No broken bones, bruises on the wrist, dehydration, rest. He left. Lorenzo came back into the room. Not onto the bed, on the floor, beside it, sitting against the nightstand, his knees folded like a punished boy, and he began to talk, but he didn't begin. I began. Who are you really? De Luca, Lorenzo De Luca, Familia. I closed the eyes that had always been mine. For how long? Since I was 24. My father died in an ambush in December. I took over at the funeral. Did you choose it? No. Vittorio Greco chose for me. And I let it happen. I swallowed hard. The splinter from the chair in Cicero still seemed lodged somewhere in me. And the men on my corner? I asked. The loan sharks who stopped pounding on Nonna's door last month. Was that you? He took his time. It was. The nurse who appeared before I even knew I needed one. That was me. The coffee? I said, and my voice slipped away in the middle of it, always on the right side of the bench. You noticed? I noticed. It was my turn to fall silent. Each of his answers pulled a brick from a wall I'd spent months building inside myself, and I didn't know if there was any house left on the other side. When he finished, he stayed silent. I heard his coat brush against the nightstand. I heard the clock in some distant hallway strike the half-hour. I heard the rain outside turn to a fine drizzle. Get out, I said. It was the only word that fit in my mouth. Lorenzo rose slowly, like someone getting up from a mass that ended too soon. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to explain more. He left. The door closed carefully, as if care could make up for something, and I lay looking at the ceiling I couldn't see, with his coat still over me, not even brave enough to push it aside. Saturday afternoon, I came down on my own for the first time. I counted 17 steps again, this time from top to bottom, my hand gripping the handrail until my knuckles ached, and reached a room that smelled of old paper and waxed wood. A library. I recognized it by the acoustics. Walls covered in books swallow sound in a way no other room does, returning your voice almost muffled, as if they respected the silence of the volumes. I sat in an armchair near what must have been the window. The leather was soft, too deep, and gave under my weight with a sigh of use. I felt the weak autumn sun on my face, and it was there that I cried. I didn't cry for Lorenzo. I cried for the man I had drawn inside myself over the last few months, with the patience of someone drawing with eyes closed, the tired broker who loved coffee, the man who described dark red walls knowing nothing of color, the man who rested his forehead against my temple at the entrance of the building and left without ever asking for one more minute. That man had died somewhere between the warehouse and the mansion staircase, and I didn't know if he had ever existed, or if I had invented him whole just to be able to endure life. The door opened. I recognized the breathing before the step. You came alone? I asked. He sent for me, Sienna answered. Said you'd need it. She crossed the library quickly and hugged me without saying anything more. She smelled of the cafe where she worked, of cheap vanilla, of rain. Her hair was wet at the ends and went cold against my neck, and I silently thanked her for that small, ordinary discomfort, for that banal thing that still existed in the world. It was the most familiar thing that had touched me in 2 days. We stayed like that for a time I didn't measure. Aurora, she said, quietly, afterward. You didn't love a liar. You loved a man who hid too much. It's not the same pain, but it hurts the same. It hurts worse. I know. She didn't try to fix it. Sienna never tries to fix it. She just stays. She kept on, with her hand in my hair, stroking it slowly, without the exaggerated care of someone afraid of breaking me, just with that firm touch of an old friend who doesn't need permission to exist close to me. Later, when the window was already cold against my back, and the whole house had changed its smell the way it changes when the day ends, I asked to speak with him. Lorenzo came into the study where Sienna had left me, and closed the door behind him with that discreet click that only exists in expensive doors. I heard his footsteps stop at a respectful distance. He waited. He didn't take a deep breath. He didn't move. He stayed where he was, like a man who'd decided that from then on, whoever decided everything was me. "Did you kill people?" I asked. "I did. Would you kill for me?" "I already have." I swallowed hard. The answer was worse than the silence I'd imagined, because it came without hesitation, without flourish, without that pause where someone tries to find the least harsh word. It was the naked truth, the exact size it was. "I need time, Lorenzo. You have it. As much as I want. As much as you want." I stood. He didn't move. I walked to where I calculated he'd be, stopped a step away, feeling the warmth of his body at that small distance, feeling his breath drop a centimeter when I came close. I stopped a step away and said the thing I had come to say. "I'm going to Switzerland. Not for you. For me." There was a second of silence before his answer. I knew, without seeing, that he'd lowered his head. I knew by the way the air between us changed height, by the way his voice came from the wrong place when he spoke again. "I understand the difference," Lorenzo said, and his voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. Lower even than on that first night on the platform when he asked me if I always played that song, or if it was just that Wednesday. I left the study with the cane tapping lightly on the parquet, counting the way by the corners I'd already memorized in a few hours. Sienna was waiting in the hallway. She gave me her arm, and the two of us began to walk toward the stairs, slowly, counting the steps together out of the habit of someone who never forgets. Behind me, I heard the study door close. And, on the other side of it, something heavy. A book, maybe. Or a man, falling to the floor. I didn't go back. Chapter 6. The Man She Saw. 4 months later, I saw Blue for the first time. The nurse removed the final bandage in a clinic room in Zurich that smelled of antiseptic and white flowers, the kind they put in tall vases near the window to give the feeling that the place isn't just a waiting corridor between two worlds. I kept my eyes closed for a few more seconds after she finished, afraid to open them and discover that the world was still what it had always been to me, a succession of smells, sounds, and friendly hands guiding my steps. I felt the cotton leave my temple, the slight tug at the dressing, the freshness of the air reaching skin that had spent weeks hidden. Then I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and lifted my eyelids. The window was to my left. The sky was a color I no longer had any memory of. A clean, high color that seemed to have been painted in layers, with lighter tones near the top and a denser, almost damp blue near the mountains. The curtains were beige, with a tiny diamond pattern that my eye still couldn't quite separate from the fabric. The sheet over my legs was light blue, paler than the sky, sewn on the inside with a white thread that twisted in small curves. Everything blurred at the edges. Everything, within the blur, alive. I cried quietly, not quite understanding why. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway. I knew because I felt his breathing, restrained, steady as always, and because the smell of that discreet perfume, something between wood and pepper, arrived even before the sound of his footsteps. He didn't come in. He waited. He waited the way he'd waited so many times, with the patience of a man who knew the price of every minute and was still capable of spending them all on me. "You can come in," I said, not yet looking. He came in slowly. He didn't go to the bed. He sat in the corner armchair, far enough away that I could choose when to turn my face. That detail, the distance he kept, said more about him than everything he'd said in 4 months of short phone calls and discreet cards sent to the rented apartment in Chicago. He was a man who knew how to enter any place in the world without asking permission, and there he was, on the other side of the room, holding his breath as if my first look were a door only I could open. I turned. I expected to find a monster. I'd spent 120 days preparing myself for the possibility of finally seeing the man Aldo Moretti had described to me in a wooden chair in Cicero, the man with the drawer closed for 2 years, the man with the coat that smelled of metal. I had drawn him in my mind, dozens of times, with shoulders too broad, bottomless eyes, a hard mouth that wouldn't know how to smile. I found a tired man. I found, amid the blur, a tired man. It was the eyes first, a dark color my brain was still translating as brown, and it was toward them that everything else converged. The hair, the temple, The thin scar I had already memorized with my fingertip in a hallway on Astor Street. All of it faded into the background. Those eyes looked at me as if I were the only place where he could rest. I didn't say anything for a whole minute, maybe 2. Neither did he. The silence between us was an inhabited place. Somehow, with furniture of its own, I recognized every corner of it. Then I smiled. Lorenzo held something in his chest that must have been his breath. His hand gripped the arm of the chair a moment longer than necessary. His fingers opened again, slowly, and it was by that detail, only that I knew he was crumbling in silence. "Hi," I said. Finally. "Hi," he answered, and that was all. We went back to Chicago 2 days later. The flight was long. I spent most of it looking at the buttons of his coat, dark, round, with a lighter line around them that I still couldn't name with certainty, because buttons were small things, and I still needed to learn the world bit by bit so I wouldn't get dizzy. Now and then I'd lift my eyes to the oval window of the plane, see a white expanse my eye still didn't know how to separate into shapes, just a thick brightness in layers, and go back to the buttons before the dizziness rose. Lorenzo noticed. He'd rest his hand on my knee without saying anything and leave it there until my body slowed down. In Little Italy, we stopped briefly so I could hug Nona. The smell of the apartment was the same as always. Basil, oil soap, a trace of medicine in the air, except now it came accompanied by a new brightness coming in through the open curtain. She was better than I remembered. There was a new nurse beside her, a woman with graying hair who was stirring a soup on the stove as if she'd known the apartment for years. Her apron tied in a bow already crumpled with use. I looked at Lorenzo. He looked at the floor. "Now how long?" I asked, quietly. "In the hallway. 3 months. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd have fought me." I smiled without meaning to. I didn't fight him. I just filed that information away, in the same place where I kept all the other things he'd done without telling me, and realized that the drawer inside me was slowly beginning to stop being a reason for fear and become a kind of proof. Nona held my face between both hands and looked at me for a long time. Looked at me the way she used to look at me before, when I couldn't see, and she kept seeing for me. Her hands were warm, with that lightness of thin skin that only the old have. "Beautiful," she said in Italian. "More beautiful still now that you can see. Nonna, and you," she went on, turning slowly to Lorenzo. She measured him from head to toe, calm, unhurried, as if her time were the only time that mattered in that room. "You promised to take care of my girl." "I did. You're keeping it." It was the only blessing she gave, and she gave it without needing bigger words. Lorenzo bowed his head in an old gesture, almost from another century, and I saw, in that second, the boy he might have been at some point, before Chicago, and before the coat that smelled of metal. "He didn't take me to the Astor Street mansion. I don't want you to live where blood has been," Lorenzo said, inside the car, as we left the neighborhood. His voice was low, controlled, but it had a tiny crack at the edge, the kind only someone who knows it by heart can hear. "I want to start in a clean place." I looked at the streets through the window, the storefronts dripping colors I still confused, the red lights of the traffic signals pooling on the wet asphalt, the silhouettes of pedestrians passing too fast for my eye to follow. I rested my temple against the cold glass and let the city pass through me. The house was small, white, tucked into a quiet stretch of street near Lake Michigan, with a wooden porch and a young olive tree planted to the right of the door. I recognized the olive tree by the shape of the leaves, which he had described to me once, months earlier, at a dinner in a closed restaurant on Taylor Street. Narrow, silvery underneath, the kind that seem to hold their own light even when the sky closes over. I went in slowly. Everything smelled of fresh paint and wood wax, with a base note of coffee that someone, probably him earlier, had brewed and left to go cold. The walls were light, the furniture sparse. There was an upright piano in the corner of the living room, used, old, not new. I recognized the keyboard before touching it, by the small curve of the central keys that signaled fingers before mine. He had bought a piano that seemed to have a history, not a piano that seemed to have a price. "You chose well," I said. "I had help." "From whom?" "From myself, finally." I laughed. It was my first laugh in 4 months that didn't sound like an apology. He laughed along with me, quietly, without showing his teeth, in his way. I crossed the living room, stopped in front of him and lifted my hand. I touched the face I had already seen at the clinic, but that I needed to learn again, this time with touch and sight at the same time. The scar at the corner of his eyebrow, the short beard, still rough under my thumb. I ran my hand down his left shoulder over his shirt and felt, even through the fabric, the rough outline of an older scar. He shifted his shoulder slightly, moved his weight a little to the other side, and said nothing. His fingers closed for a moment over the ring on his right hand, and I touched the uneven shape of the seal without yet being able to trace with my finger what was engraved there. His woody perfume rose closer when he breathed. I felt the warmth of his skin rise against the palm of my hand and realized his breathing had stopped again. He closed his eyes. He didn't take his hand from his side. He didn't pull me to him. He waited. "May I?" I asked. "You may." I kissed him once. It was a simple kiss, and it said, without words, that I was there, that I had chosen to be, that the library door from that Saturday afternoon had, finally, opened again. When I pulled away, I saw his eyes again, closer. This time, I could spend the rest of my life learning those eyes. The bedroom door closed behind us. The hallway light went out. Morning came gray and sweet over the lake. I came down in a robe, barefoot, my hair still damp. The floor was cold under my feet and creaked slightly in two spots in the living room, a music of an old house that I was already beginning to memorize. Lorenzo was already in the kitchen. He'd set 2 cups on the counter, 2 saucers, a jug of milk, and the sugar. He didn't ask if I wanted any. He knew. "Good morning. Good morning." He handed me a cup, held the glass door open with his shoulder, and we went out together onto the porch. Lake Michigan was still, a silvery gray, with small white lines where a very light wind passed. A gull cut across the sky far off, became a thin streak, and vanished. I sat. He sat beside me. He rested his bare foot against mine, under the table, without ceremony, and I didn't move away. Aurora. He took a sip of coffee before continuing. The cup came down slowly to the saucer. His fingers stayed closed around the porcelain for a moment, like someone using the warmth to choose the next word. "There are things I'm going to need to change. I don't promise everything, but there are things I'm going to change." I looked at him from the side. I studied his profile against the gray of the lake, brown of the eyes, white of the temple, the line of the jaw. I thought of all the men who promise everything and deliver nothing, and of how that man there, with everything he had in his hands, was being careful enough to promise me only what he could deliver. "I accept the beginning," I said. He lowered his eyes for a second, smiled at the cup, and covered my hand with his on the table. His hand was heavy, warm, with a faint callus at the base of the thumb. We stayed like that for a while. I looked at the lake. I looked at his reflection in the glass of the porch to my left, where the image arrived crooked, with some outlines still escaping my sight, the shoulder a little less defined, the hair a little less sharp, the edge of the jaw dissolving into a soft blur that blended into the gray of the sky. The nurse in Zurich had warned me. The surgery would keep progressing for months still. Some things would take longer than others, I thought, for just a second, before smiling again and going back to drinking my coffee. I hope I never confuse what I see with what is really there. His hand squeezed mine just a little. I squeezed back.